This is a lesson for 10.3 through 10.7. On 10.3, we're finishing up 81 through 92, 81, 82, 83, and 84, and 85 and 86 are the distance formula, which is the formula that I've highlighted there, where you take an x minus an x and then square it. You take a y minus a y and then square it, and add those two together and then the square root of it. On 82, you see the work shown there. You need to be very careful. It's -6 minus a minus 5 squared, and then plus a -6 minus a -2 squared. So it makes it -1 squared in parentheses and -4 squared in parentheses. And so you get 1 plus 16, square root of 17. Then follow along on the work on 84. Notice they were square roots to begin with. Notice what was done. Work through that. Make sure you're understanding. Then we simplified the radical. Then 85 and 86, working with decimals. I left the answer as the square root of 170.69. Then we use the midpoint formula, which is the formula there where you add the two x's together and divide by 2, add the two y coordinates together and divide by 2. You need to remember that formula, and then you're getting an ordered pair once you do this. The work is shown on 88 there. Then 89 and 90, again, two ordered pairs, add them together, divide by 2. Add your x's, add your y's, divide by 2 on each of them. Notice 91 and 92. Then the meat of our assignment is on 10.4, breaking down radicals. 27 is shown there, the problem. It's going to take some time to work through it. It's very important to work through that. 28, you have 3 times the square root of 8, x squared, y cubed, all underneath the square root. You need to break down the 8 to 4 and 2. The x squared we can take the square root of. The y cubed we break down as y squared and y, as I've shown you there. Then on the 32 we break it down as 16 and 2. The y cubed we break down as y squared and y. Please follow along the work there. 29 is shown there, and then 30 is right below that, where we've got to break down the cube root of 24. Please, it takes some time following through that. What you do, please slow this down and take your time and work through it. I took the cube root of 24 is 8 and 3, the cube root of x cubed, and the cube root of y to the fourth I changed to y to the cubed and y on the first part. Then notice the second part. The cube root of 81 is 27 and 3. Then your y to the fourth the same way, cube root of y cubed and y. Make sure we talk about these kind of things. This is a very important section. We need to talk about it in class also. Follow along this work, and I'll do some odd examples in class. Then 31 is a much simpler problem because we don't have to break down anything there. We just add the like ones together. The same way with 32. You got 3 times the cube root of 5 plus 4 times square root of 5 minus 8 square root of 5. The last two are alike because they're both square root of 5s, giving us that answer. Then 33 and 34, again, a challenging problem. We got to break down the numbers we have there. Notice, follow along, and really study it and go into detail. 35 and 36, a little bit simpler because they're not so hard to break down. Like on 36, you break down the square root of 45 into square root of 9 and 5. Remember, you got to take a number into your 45 since it's square root that you can take the square root of. Square root of 9 is 3. So it becomes 3 square root of 5. Please follow along with that work and notice the simplification. 37 and 38. Okay. Same type of thing. We had to break down the 4th root of 48. The 4th root of 16 and 3 goes in there. Again, we need to work examples in class to see this. 39, same way. We're breaking down this fraction on 39 and 40. Notice what we've done there. Okay, follow along with the work. And please, let's talk about questions in class here. Kind of tough work here. 41 and 42. Notice there are 2 terms in the denominator. We need to rationalize the denominator. When there's 2 terms with a radical in the denominator, we multiply by the conjugate. The conjugate of radical 7 minus 4 is radical 7 plus 4 that we multiply on top and bottom to get rid of that radical. Notice, same thing on 44. Negative 8 over square root of y plus 4. We've got the radical in the denominator, so we multiply by the conjugate of that. When you have radical y plus 4, the conjugate is radical y minus 4 that we multiply on top and bottom. On top, you use the distributive property. On the bottom, you use FOIL, and then simplify. Then we go to 10.6, reviewing what you do on equations with a radical in it. If you've got an equation with a radical in it and the variable's in the radical, get that radical by itself. Notice 14. First step, get the radical on the left side by itself by moving the 4 to the other side. Then to rid yourself of the radical, we cube both sides because it was a cube root. And that gives you 2x minus 6 on the left side, and you cube the 4 on the right side, 64. And then you do your algebra and solve that, 35. And then I put the 35 back in the original problem and solved it. Okay? And made sure it checked, which it did. Then on 10.7, these are just like algebra, except there's going to be an I in it and maybe an I squared. Anytime you have an I, you just treat it normally. But if you have an I squared, you put negative 1 in for the I squared, such as 50. Negative 6i times negative 4i. Negative 6 and negative 4 is 24. Normal multiplication. I times I is I squared. So you have 24i squared, except you put negative 1 in for I squared always. So it's 24 times negative 1, negative 24. 52 is just a simple subtraction problem, but people get confused on it. Negative 2 minus 4i, subtracting the quantity 6 minus 8i. Remember, that subtraction in front of that second parenthesis changes both signs. Then you just add together like terms, just like algebra, nothing different. You have an I in there, but nothing different. 54 is a distributive property. You get 10i minus 5i squared, and then for that I squared, you put negative 1 in, and it simplifies. Now 56, we've got to rationalize that denominator because there's an I in the denominator. That's the square root of negative 1. That's a radical, so we need to get rid of the radical in the denominator. Since it's only one term, we multiply top and bottom by I to get rid of the I over here. Notice it's 6i plus 8i squared over 3i squared. Then, of course, always we put negative 1 in for the I squared. So 6i minus 8 over negative 3. Number 57 and 58 is simply FOIL. Just happen to have an I in there. And when you come up with an I squared, when we multiply those, you put a negative 1 in for it. Then we skip 59 and 60. 61 and 62 is just addition. You add like terms together. 7 plus 4 is 11. 4i minus 4i is 0, so just 11. 64, again, is FOIL. Use FOIL on it. 6 times 6, 6 times negative 2i. And then the 2i times the 6. Then 2i times negative 2i. And then you multiply out things that multiplied out. And remember, we get an I squared again. Put negative 1 in for that I squared. So that makes that plus 4 there. 36 plus 4 is 40. Then 66 again. Like the previous one earlier problem, we have an I in the denominator. When it's one term down there, we multiply by I over I. And then we use the distributive property. And then if we have an I squared, which we did on top and bottom, we put negative 1 in and simplify. 68 is 4 minus 7i squared. So that means 4 minus 7i times 4 minus 7i, FOIL. And then you come through and you get an I squared. Again, put negative 1 in there and simplify. Now, 69 and 70, we've got to rationalize the denominator, but this time we have two terms in the denominator, 3 minus 2i. So when there's more than one term in the denominator with a radical, we multiply by the conjugate, you remember. 3 plus 2i over 3 plus 2i times top and bottom. Notice what it gives us. But by multiplying by that conjugate on the bottom, notice the two middle terms cancel out. And then we simplify. Okay, skip 71 and 72. 73 and 74 is like 69 and 70. We need to get rid of, we've got two terms in the denominator. So to rationalize that denominator, we multiply by the conjugate. Top and bottom. Again, both top and bottom, we use FOIL, which I've done here. Then I put negative 1 in for the I squareds. 75 is just in the simple addition problem. 76, simple addition problem. Add like terms together. I have you skipping 77 through 80. Now, if you have I to greater powers than 1, just put I squared in as many times as you can. For instance, over here, I to the 10th is I squared 5 times, because that gives you I to the 10th. And then you put negative 1 in for that I squared, so it's negative 1 to the 5th, which is negative 1. Now, if you have an odd number, like this one and this one, put I squared in as many times as you can. 7 times gets me to 14, not 15, so I have an I left over times it. So negative 1 is to the 7th with that I left over, so it's negative 1i on this assignment.